Good morning, a warm welcome to the next in our technology webinar series. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. It really is wonderful to be able to spend this Friday morning. I know it's rather summery and so on, but really we are immensely grateful for you taking the opportunity to join us as we explore accessible technology at work. My name is let's start that again. Apparently I don't know my name. My name is Darren Pascal, and I am our technology information champion here at Thomas Pocklington Trust, and we have my two colleagues here on the panel today, Graham and Robert. Would you like to introduce yourselves? Graham.
Yep.
Okay, hi, I'm Graham, and I'm a technology officer at Pocklington.
I'm Robert. I'm Technology Information Intern for Thomas Pocklington Trust.
Brilliant. And actually, I think we should probably mention at this point that, as it happens, all three of us are actually ourselves. We are visually impaired. We are blind users of assistive technology. So actually, what we're going to be talking about today is technology that we are using actually right now at this very moment. Before we go any further, just a few things to make you aware of. So this session is being recorded, so we will archive the recording of this webinar and make it available on our website afterwards. So don't worry if you miss anything, you'll be able to reference that later. And also, don't be too worried about taking notes as we go throughout this, because we are also going to make available a list of resources and links to information that we mention throughout our time today. So don't worry too much about that. What we would like you to do though is to submit questions. Now as this session goes on, you will be not broadcasting at all, so don't worry about having to have your video or microphone or anything like that enabled. We've actually disabled the video and audio facilities for all of our guests today, so don't worry about that. What you will be able to do though is submit questions through the Q&A button. So if you're inside the Zoom window on a desktop computer, you can tab around and there's a Q&A button, and when you press that, there'll be a nice little box that will pop up, and feel free to type a question in there, and we'll see it, and we'll do our best to get to questions throughout the session. We're also going to end with a large Q&A section as well. Right, well, I guess we have actually already introduced ourselves. Having said that though, I have not yet introduced our producer, so big thanks to our colleague Amardeep Toki. How are you doing, Amardeep? He is actually hiding in the background and making sure that everything is just ticking over okay, and also will be alerting us to any Q&A in case there's something that we miss. So one way or another, we'll do our best to get to your questions. So what are we actually going to cover today? So well, we are Thomas Pocklington Trust. Why are we even here in the first place? We are actually, well, it's kind of obvious really. We believe in a society where blind and partially sighted people can participate fully. And our strategy places emphasis on education, employment and engagement to support blind and partially sighted people to live the life they want to lead. Now in all of these areas, technology is so important. It's such a key enabler in opportunities, creating and enabling opportunities for blind and partially sighted people in education, employment and engagement. And I think it's really worth emphasising the employment one today, because that's exactly why we're here talking about accessible technology at work. So what are we going to cover today? So we're going to begin with a panel discussion, and we're going to cover a couple of elements. First of all, talking about screen readers, Braille displays and peripherals. So we're going to unpack each of those terms and kind of talk about how we as blind employees make use of this technology, or rather these technologies, in our daily kind of working environment. We're also going to talk about note-taking, because this is one of those areas where there are a myriad of options, and sometimes it kind of depends on what you want to do, as to how you would go about doing it. And I think that's probably true in note-taking, almost especially, I would say. So we'll talk about that and what the three of us employ when faced with a note-taking scenario. We'll also have a look at Office productivity software. So we'll kind of go through a couple of workflow examples and talk to you about how we actually approach them. And so we'll come to those shortly. And we're also going to have some live demonstrations, because it's all very well talking about something, but if you can actually get an opportunity to hear and see a screen reader in action, then hopefully that will kind of help bring it to life a little bit more. So we'll have two of those examples. We'll have a live demonstration of collaboration in Google Docs, and we'll also have a look at using a screen reader to participate in an online meeting, which does seem, on the face of it, like a somewhat unusual demo to attempt in the middle of a webinar context, but we'll come back to that, because there is a very good reason that we're going to give that a go shortly. Right, well, let's get on to the first of our panel discussion topics. And I guess when talking about screen readers, braille displays and peripherals, well, there's quite a lot to unpack there. Why don't we approach this from a slightly different angle and talk about how we have our workstations set up. So, Robin, if I could come to you first, can you tell us about what you have available? What does your workstation look like at the moment?
Thank you, Darren. Well, my home workstation, given the fact that in sort of the current times we're in, and the need to prepare a workspace at home, particularly because in an environment where I don't actually have a dedicated office space, I've cleared a section of a desk to put my laptop on, and I have a Windows laptop, and I use JAWS for Windows 2020 screen reader, and I have this headset. It's a Plantronics headset that I'm using at the moment, that I use when I'm on calls, and I also have a Freedom Scientific Focus 40 Blue Braille display that I use in, not all the time, but I use it in particular situations. But yeah, that's a pretty brief overview of my sort of general work setup. I also have an iPhone too, an Apple iPhone that I use with VoiceOver for work-related stuff while on the move.
Sure, brilliant, thank you. How about you, Graham?
Well, it's a fairly similar setup to Robert's in many ways. I have a desk in my bedroom, because we're all working from home, and I've only got a couple of rooms to choose from, really, and one's a kitchen, so better to have it in the bedroom, I think. The work laptop, and I have a brilliant BI40 Braille display from Humanware, which I use mainly when I need to do editing of text, check spellings, etc. So I use a mixture of Braille and speech output from JAWS. I do have other screen readers that I can use if necessary, NVDA and narrator, but JAWS is the primary one.
Excellent. Yeah, I've got to say, no surprises here. My setup is very, very similar. A laptop, a smartphone, and I think it's kind of worth pointing out these days that actually for so many working environments, as we've seen in the current environment, it's actually possible to do so much with a computer and a phone. You're kind of all set to go, really. And you know, we mentioned the screen reader and the Braille display extras here, because that's really what turns a laptop from being you know, a piece of kit to a productivity machine for a blind or partially sighted person. And so that's kind of why we're kind of unpacking this a little bit. And also I guess this kind of applies to all of us here on the tech team. As far as possible, we try and make sure that we have access to more than one screen reader. JAWS is an excellent starting point. It's stable, it's mature, and it is under constant development, and it continues to be the industry standard for getting efficient access to productivity software. But there are always going to be circumstances where you're coming across a kind of a scenario or website or something that maybe isn't quite playing ball. And sometimes if things aren't kind of behaving as expected, to be able to have a backup option can be really helpful. And since NVDA is free and the narrator screen reader is built into Windows machines, well, we've got them. Now, I guess if we can just touch a little bit more on the screen reader side of things, is there? I've already kind of stuck my head above the parapet and sort of said how JAWS is my preferred screen reader. I guess for both of you, do you have a particular preference for a screen reader? And is there anything that you've actually done, either now or at any point kind of in the past, to your screen reader to make sure that it's kind of configured optimally for whatever it is that you need to be doing? Graham, can I start with you on that?
Yeah, so note takers, was that a note
screen
taker
readers?
Oh,
screen
sorry,
readers.
you said I had a small outage for about 5 seconds there, so I'm sorry about that. That's the other fun and games about working from home. I'm glad it's come back. Yeah, so screen readers, I mean, it's almost always JAWS. It's almost always JAWS. Use it a lot with Office, and email and web.
Are there any things that any kind of customizations or anything that people kind of new to a screen reader might find useful to kind of bear in mind?
Yeah. I mean, because I think sometimes they can all be a little bit verbose. It's great when you first get a screen reader and start using it. You often need the guidance, but it can be a little bit verbose, and there's usually a way of making adjustments to verbosity. I think this is particularly true of JAWS, which is one of the reasons that it's so well liked. Also the fact with JAWS that there's an easy, it's one that you have to pay for, but there is an easy update program.
Absolutely.
There's JAWS Windows Premium is.
Yes, well, that's a very good point, and in fact, we would all recommend that anybody going through an access to work process definitely go for the JAWS Premium option, because what that does is ensure that you have access to updates to the JAWS screen reader for another couple of years after initially acquiring it, and that is just so important. We're at a time where technology is moving at an incredible breakneck pace, and it just takes one thing to change somewhere, and there are so many variables to make that need to come together to make one of these kind of setups a reality. And so you want to make sure that you've got access, if you possibly can, to the latest screen reader, because that will make sure that you have the best possible chance of being productive with whatever it is that you need to be using. Robert, here's an interesting one. Have you come across a situation where maybe your screen reader hasn't been talking as it should have been, and when you're in a situation like that, what can you do?
When I've run into those kind of situations, normally I have used backup screen reader. So, for example, I usually, even though I use JAWS on a daily basis, generally because of the way that it works with a lot of the productivity apps that I use, I still keep, say, NVDA or narrator around. Because if one doesn't work, the other one is more likely going to work at least long enough to get you out of a situation. I know that JAWS, certainly in more recent updates, has gotten a lot better about handling itself when it runs into difficulty, but there's always other options. I also generally I'll use one of the text recognition apps on the iPhone, like Seeing AI or Envision AI, to point it at the screen so that I can see, particularly on if there's an issue on startup and I'm wondering why it's not talking. It could be because there's something on the screen that I didn't, there might be an error message that I, that can't necessarily read, but I can see what it is on the screen with Seeing AI.
There's also a point that, and this is again a key consideration for wanting, if you're in the job market and you have secured a job offer, the earlier that you can actually get some kind of access to work application in, the better, because sometimes if you are able at all to get an opportunity to kind of spend a little bit of time in front of a typical IT system that you might be using, it might be at that point that you discover that actually there might be a program that you need to use that maybe this sort of software might not work with. And in those situations, both JAWS and NVDA, but certainly JAWS has got the historic advantage here, are extremely configurable. You can get scripts from a number of third-party providers are able to program these things, and they're essentially just small programs that kind of sit on top of JAWS and enable it to read in situations where otherwise it might not. So actually, you might not appreciate this, but there are scripts inside of JAWS that enable all sorts of functions when you're, say, in Word or on the web, and we'll actually look at one of those a little bit later on. But let's move on to note-taking, and I guess looking at preferred note-taking strategies and solutions, we could approach this in all sorts of ways, but Graham, if I could ask you to sort of talk a little bit about what it is that you use when faced with a note-taking situation. How do you go about it?
Okay, well, my preferred option is to use a Braille device. It's particularly useful in a meeting, and I currently use the Braille Note Touch Plus, which is a 32-cell device. It runs on Android, and it allows you to do quite a lot of things, including sending emails and browsing the web. It always does a bit more than I need, really, though. There are a new crop of sort of hybrid devices that are primarily Braille displays, but they have simple note-taking. But it's this thing about being able to take a Braille device into a meeting that you can work on quietly. You can concentrate on the meeting rather than having JAWS talking in one ear, which, if you're not a Braille user or you can't access a Braille device, you might well need that. But I prefer the Braille device so that I can concentrate on the meeting and write usable notes at the same time.
Excellent. How about you, Robert? What's your approach?
My approach to taking notes generally depends on the situation. Certainly in sort of pre-COVID times when face-to-face meetings were the big thing, usually I would bring in a portable Braille display. A lot of the Braille displays now, like either the Focus 40 Blue that I use, some of the ones from Humanware, like the Brailliant, even some of the ones aimed at the sort of more consumer market, like the Orbit Reader, they have built-in note-taking applications, so you can take notes with them. And the good thing about those kind of devices is that they're almost instant on, so that you can flick a switch and literally you'll be ready to type within seconds, instead of having to wait for a computer. If I'm on a virtual meeting, say something like this, then I'll generally open a notepad document in Windows Notepad, because again, you can be ready to type within seconds, so you're not missing information as you're trying to sort of scrabble around to get everything loaded. You're just there and ready to start taking your notes down.
That's a really good point. I use Notepad so much, especially when I'm in front of a computer. But then there are situations where I find that I'm nowhere near a computer and maybe need to note down a phone number. And it can be a bit of a faff, if you've got your phone out and somebody gives you a number, making sure you're in the contacts app and add the contacts, then you're typing in the right box. That is so time consuming. What I tend to do when in that situation is just open up the Notes app on the phone. Because while somebody is actually giving me information, it doesn't matter what order I receive the information. What's important at that point is that I'm recording the information, and then I can review it and process it at a later date. So I tend to open up Notes, sometimes dictate. Actually, if it's something like I want to record a scenario or testing outcomes in testing or something, I actually might go into voice memos or just record the audio straight and then play it back later. But in Notes, when faced with text, you might think, well, hang on, you've got a smartphone keyboard to contend with there. Two options there. Either a Bluetooth keyboard. You can get some very small pocket-sized Bluetooth keyboards. But actually, these days, the one that I use more often than not, the approach that I use in this situation is actually the built-in Braille screen input feature in VoiceOver. Now, again, I know we're going into specifics here, but it's essentially a way that anybody who's got an iPhone can actually Braille virtually onto the screen to make notes. And it works in Notes. You can use it for texts and emails and all sorts of things. And it does take a little bit of getting used to, because it kind of involves holding your phone in a slightly different orientation to maybe what you might be used to. But once you practice with it, and that's probably the fastest way that I can note down information with a phone to hand. All right, well, let's have a look at some professional workflow examples in the context of office productivity. Now, we're not going to spend too much time talking about this, because what's going to be, I'm sure, far more interesting is to actually see some of this productivity software in action. But a couple of workflow ideas here, particularly in, say, editing. We've got word processors are really fantastic things, but we just take them for granted now. This idea that you can, pull up a document, make tweaks to it, edit it, and make it ready without having to, close it down and start from scratch. But there are still potentially some complications here, especially when you have maybe more than one person involved in the editing process. How can you easily tell when somebody has made a change somewhere? So, can you tell us, Robert, a little bit about how JAWS works in this sort of situation with, say, track changes in Word?
So generally, taking the track changes example specifically, in a lot of, for those who don't know what track changes is, it's in Word. Generally, you'll find this used in a lot of workplace environments when a document needs to be edited by more than one person. If you turn on the track changes feature, it will keep track of who has edited what part of the document. And generally, what you can do with JAWS is, certainly with JAWS, as you're navigating through the document, it'll tell you which sections have been revised by somebody else. So if you navigate into a paragraph, it'll say revised, and then it'll read the paragraph and it says end revised, and it leaves the area that's been revised by someone else. There's also, in the latest versions of JAWS, you can press Windows key and semicolon, and you'll get a list of options. So just comments and footnotes, endnotes, and revisions, and it'll open in the JAWS virtual viewer a list of all the comments and revisions and who made them in a document.
That's a really interesting point there, because of course already in Word you get access to this content separately, but what JAWS is actually doing here is not as such reading that content as Word displays it, but actually getting hold of the content and redisplaying it in a format that's more friendly to boost productivity. So actually, this is an excellent example of a situation where sifting quickly through comments or getting straight to a comment is actually something that a screen reader user may well find easier than somebody who isn't using a screen reader. So really it's fascinating, and there's a whole huge list of these features that these screen readers have added. Certainly in the case of JAWS, when you want to kind of know what's available, you can just press, I think by default if you're in the desktop layout, it's Insert plus H is the hotkey help command, or Caps Lock plus H, the hotkey command if you're in the laptop layout, and whichever program you're in, it will then give you this incredibly helpful list of all the features and commands that are available in that context. There was one other really brief workflow I wanted to touch on here, which is research, because again this is kind of one of those areas where you might end up having multiple applications open at once, and within, say, a web browser, probably goodness knows how many tabs if you're trying to compare features of various products in a specific category, for instance. So what I normally do when I'm in this situation is I have, let's say, the browser open with these different tabs, and that's kind of nice because you don't have to mess around with making sure that you alt tab to the right program, because it's all inside the browser. So you just get to the browser and then you can use various commands like Control Tab and Control Shift Tab to move around all the different tabs that you're on, and it will remember the one that you were viewing, which is, again, simple stuff but really convenient. And then I normally have a notepad window. Again, we've already touched on this. It's a really straightforward application. It's just about noting down information, and so I can easily copy and paste information from any of these browser tabs, including a URL, for instance, into Notepad, and then when it comes to writing it all up and making sense of it, that's when Word comes in, and you've got all those fabulous editing features kind of available. All right, well, let's move on to the first of our live demo segments. What's a live segment when it's at home? And for this, I'm actually going to just shut down this presentation and switch to a Google document. Now, I believe, Robert, you are already having a look at this particular document, because what we're going to look at here is what's involved from a screen reader perspective when you're actually faced with the prospect of potentially making changes or collaborating in a document with more than one other person. How on earth does that work from a speech context? I'm just going to make this little change here. It would help if I pressed the right button, wouldn't it? While I'm doing this, and again, I know I'm maybe slightly putting you on the spot here, Graham, we have the Vital Tech website. Would you be able to just really briefly give an intro to guests who maybe don't know what Vital Tech is? What is it about?
Okay, so the vitaltech.org.uk website, the idea is that people can use it to search for various kinds of information that relates to technology, both in terms of people working from home and from people who are at work. And we've got sections on various things, such as anything from sort of Braille displays, screen magnifiers, note takers, using it. And then in the home section, you have things like using TVs and things like that. What's available in terms of listening to the radio, smart speakers. But the point about it is that it's an easy site to use. There are quite a lot of tools out there where you can go searching for things, but the idea of the Vital Tech website is it's simple, it gives you the search results, and it gives information which often points you to other sources of information which will be useful. So it's if there's an area that you need an introduction to, that you need to find out about, this is a great resource for, it gives you a great place to start and find explanations and related information, related links, etc.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Right, I'm hoping that I have enabled the screen share sufficiently so that there's a lovely Google tab open here. Can I just confirm with you, gentlemen, if I press this key, did you hear that?
No.
Oh dear. Right. Let's try that again. So if I go into this box here and we go to share computer sound. There we go. Can you hear Jules talking?
Yeah, it started screen share. That he said started screen share, then it stopped again within about 2 seconds.
Excellent. Lovely jubbly. Right. So I'm now going to move to this Google Chrome tab. Now I've actually already taken the liberty of opening up Google Docs. Now you get to Google Docs if you've got a Google account. You'll know this already. You just go to docs.google.com, and then if you're already logged in, you'll be straight into the screen that I have on display here. The first thing, and I wish I could have shown you this, but unfortunately it wasn't quite possible, but the first thing that you actually hear when you're in here, especially if you've been in here before and already done this, I heard it say screen reader support enabled. Now
we're not getting your speech coming through. Just
no. I'm not pressing anything at the moment. That's all right. But I actually have already enabled screen reader support. If you've never done that before, then the keyboard command to do that is Control-Alt-Z. But anyway, now I'm in this tab. I'm going to actually go off-piste here, disable the JAWS virtual cursor mode, and just let Google handle everything. So let's do that. And there we are, Google Docs. If I do some tabbing around, it says I'm in a list of recent documents. And there it is. So I'm now going to press enter on this document. Okay, so it's given us all sorts of information there. It's brought us straight into the document, but interestingly, because Robert's got it open, it said Robert is no longer editing this paragraph, and it started to read this document. So there's nothing particularly fancy about this document. All it is funnily enough, an outline of all the content that we want to cover today here in the webinar. So here it is. It just looks and feels like a standard Word document, to be honest. I'm just going to arrow up and down here.
The key thing to remember when you're using a Google Doc is, if you're a JAWS user particularly, is to make sure that you turn off the JAWS virtual cursor.
Absolutely, yeah. So that was insert Z is the default keyboard command to toggle that on and off. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Robin. You definitely want that turned off at this point. And yeah, it just feels like a standard document. We've got a couple of headings here. So there we go. Just going to arrow down here.
Darren, I don't think the screen's being shared at this moment.
Can you hear my speech?
No.
No.
Oh dear. Well, I've.
So it did say screen. As I said, it did say sharing screen. Then about 2 seconds later, it said stop sharing, and that was that.
Oh, let's try this again. Right. Collaboration test.
I could screen share. Stop sharing.
There we go.
Yeah, it started and then stopped.
Switching. Collaboration.
That is doing now.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
working fine now.
Excellent. Well, sorry about that. So yeah, let's start from the top of this document.
Heading 1, accessible technology at work. Bullet link start accessible technology. Bullet when Friday.
So yeah, I'm just arrowing up and down through this document, and it just feels, as I say, exactly like a Word document. We've got a couple of headings here, some bullets. There are actually some interesting ways you can navigate this document. Google has a whole host of navigation commands for screen reader users, and they're a little bit fiddly, but you start off, it's almost 2 commands at once. So the first command you can press here is Control-Alt-P, and that then tells Google to expect to receive a navigation command. So if I do Control-Alt-H, it's not worked, has it?
Heading 1, production. Bullet.
I'll have to try that a bit quicker.
Heading 1
Yeah,
accessible.
there we go. So it does work, but you have to press it very quickly together. But it's so fiddly. It's so fiddly to do that, but it's nice that you can do it. But there's an alternative. If you're a JAWS user, you actually don't have to worry about this at all. If you're already familiar with the quick key navigation commands that you can use, for instance, H to jump to a heading on a web page, you can do that in a Google Doc as well. So to get to that mode, it's a layered keystroke, so insert space and then followed by Q. So if I do that here,
Quick keys.
it says quick keys, and then I can just press H,
Heading 1 production team.
and
Heading 1 content and running order.
there we are.
Robert Cummings is editing this paragraph.
It's moving around there, and to get out of that, because maybe I want to make a change, so let's do an escape and just scroll down here, check I haven't missed anything.
You are Bullet Office product. Bullet demo. Bullet demo. Using a screen reader to participate in online meetings. Robert Cummings is editing this paragraph. You are no longer editing your collaborator's new line. Robert Cummings is editing this paragraph. Robert Cummings is no longer editing this paragraph. You are no.
Now it can get a little bit verbose sometimes, so just one of those things to bear in mind. But actually, if I now look at the bottom here,
New line. Bullet demo. Using a screen reader to participate in online meetings. Robert Cummings is editing in your. You are no longer live Q&A.
because I neglected to add the Q&A onto the end of it, and Robert's just typed that in. Brilliant. So there you go. That is kind of in a nutshell what it might look like if you get a Google document open with a colleague, you know, it's doable, and there are all sorts of interesting accessibility hacks and features that exist within the G Suite context. For instance, if you want to move around the menu bar, I think it's Alt / and there we are. We're in the
tools format.
We're in the Google Docs menu system. Escape to get out of that.
Leaving menus.
And the most interesting one of all, if I've remembered this right,
Keyboard shortcuts dialog.
Control / and this works in Google Docs, Sheets, Gmail, Meet, anywhere, will bring up a list of keyboard shortcuts that you can then view, and there are so many of them here. So there you go. In a nutshell, that is Google Docs. Right, we're now going to have a really quick fire look around the Teams interface. That is the clue to this
Meeting controls.
Demonstration of online meeting stuff in the middle of a webinar, because Teams is another of these platforms, and it is accessible, but it's also quite extensive in terms of its feature set. It can be a little bit confusing when you're presented with this interface and you think, right, how on earth do I go about joining a meeting? Well, let's have a look at that. So I'm just going to attempt to get the sharing working. Guys, if this doesn't work, please do shout straight away and I'll get on it. So let's toggle this, and we go into the Teams window.
Screen share. Stop share.
Now I'm hoping that there's a Teams window up here. Let's
Meeting controls.
get to it.
Task switching. Zoom. Accessible technology. PowerPoint. Collaboration. Chat. Collaborate. Chat.
There it is. So this is Teams. I'm hoping that you can still hear the JAWS on here. Excellent.
Yep.
Now, the first thing to note with Teams is there are so many different tabs, and depending on what you might want to be doing, whether it's chatting, making a call, or checking activity, getting in your calendar, there's a different tab for all of those things. And there are keyboard shortcuts to get to each of these individual tabs. It tends to be on a desktop, Control, and then the number row, so 1 through about 4, 5, 6. Each of those Control 1, Control 2, Control 3, Control 4 will take you to a different tab. Now, all we're going to do here is look at what's involved in finding a meeting in your calendar and joining it. So that means getting to the Calendar tab, so we do Control 4.
Calendar grid main region. The 24th of July, 11:30 to the 24th.
And here we are in the calendar view. So there is, thankfully, I think only one thing for us to be aware of here. Almost right on time. I think we might actually be a couple of minutes late, but even so, if I press Tab at this point,
Technology team meeting. the 24th of July 11:30 to the 24th of July 11:45.
So there is the meeting in my calendar, and you can press tab to move to all of the meetings in the day that's currently selected, and just like in the standard day view in other calendar applications like Outlook, for instance, it's left and right arrow key to select the day that you're interested in. Up and down arrow, I think they also move the times that you're in, but tab and shift tab, that's the key one to move among the events in here. Now, how do you actually join this? So what I would tend to do here is press the applications key or shift F10 to bring up the context menu of options that pertain to this meeting.
Menu, view, 1 of 6.
And we've got a few options here, but if we arrow down to...
Chat with participants. Join online, 3 of 6.
And there it is, join online, so press enter on that.
Leaving menus. Technology team meeting, the 24th of July 11:30 to the 24th of July 11:40.
Okay, and it gets a bit verbose here, but we're now on a screen where it's asking us if we want to enable things like...
Join the meeting button. Enable video toggle button pressed.
Like the video and the microphone and so on. But you're good to go from that point. All you do then is just press the...
Join the meeting button.
Join the meeting button, and it will take you in there. Now, I'm not actually going to get inside that screen at the moment. It's fairly straightforward. There's generally not that much to worry about once you're in there. It's just you can see things like there's a show chat button, there's a show participants button. You might see something like more options for screen sharing depending on how the meeting's been configured. But you can just tab around there, and they're all just there. Again, there are actually a whole host of keyboard shortcuts to be aware of within Teams.
Enable video.
Now, I'm attempting to get out of this interface here, but I'm a bit kind of stuck here. How do I get out of it? Well, let's try Control E.
Search region, combo box.
And there it is. It's taken us straight to the search box, which is so handy. Particularly in the calendar view, I so often get just totally stuck and can't seem to tab out of it or find the other controls for the different tabs and so on. So Control E to get to the search box, that's really handy because that's right at the start of all of these other tabs. And you can also get to keyboard shortcuts. In fact, when you're in this box, you can just type
Key. Suggestions updated. Combo box. Key press enter to look for messages.
Well, you should be able to, but let's tab one more.
Profile. App settings and more button.
And there's the standard kind of profile button, and if we just open up that menu, so press enter on that.
Menu. Zoom in.
I'm just going down all the options.
Zoom keyboard shortcuts.
Keyboard shortcuts. You can actually get a whole huge list.
Virtual cursor on. Dialog keyboard shortcuts. Modal dialog. General heading level 2. General heading level 2. Go to. Control G. Open up slide out. Control Graph.
And here we are in the list of Teams keyboard shortcuts, and there are so many of them. So if you ever kind of wonder, oh, how do I toggle my microphone or my camera on and off? Well, there are keyboard shortcuts, and they're all in this list in Teams.
Virtual
okay,
your profile picture.
I think that's probably about as far as we can go without potentially causing any further difficulty. So I'm now going to stop the screen share here, but hopefully that's been enough to give you a kind of a demo, a really brief overview of how a screen reader works with the sort of application that you might come across in a workplace context. While I just faff around here for a bit to get myself back in order and whatever, I'm going to ask any of the panel or Amadeep, do we have any questions that have come our way at this point?
Yeah,
we've got about 45 questions.
45 questions!
45.
4 to 5.
Oh, 4 to 5. Okay, excellent. I was going to say 45. We might struggle to cover that many questions in what we've got remaining. I'm just going to get to the stop button because I don't want my speech to be interfering with anybody's answers to this. So if you just bear with me a little moment here. Meeting controls. There we go. Hopefully you're not hearing my speech anymore. So let's take a question, shall we?
Okay, so one question, I'll address this to Rob as he was talking about JAWS. What is the difference between JAWS Home and JAWS Professional?
JAWS Home is the version that's for use on personal computers, and JAWS Professional is the version that is required if you're buying JAWS for use in a corporate or organization environment.
Now, actually, there's no difference at all here in the software that you're using. The feature set is absolutely identical. In fact, it's exactly the same program that you download from the website to get JAWS running on a system. The only difference is in the licensing conditions that surround it. So, unfortunately, they do require that in a workplace context, if it's in a commercial setting, you need to have a professional license.
There is the remote side of things. If you need to use Citrix and that sort of thing, isn't that part of the Pro?
It's an add-on to the Pro, but it's
only
available
for the Pro, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But it's
small differences.
Yeah, and actually a very relevant difference, especially if you find yourself working more remotely, because if you happen to need to access some kind of remote desktop system, or I don't know, Citrix or something like that, that should be possible, or at least it's theoretically possible, with the add-on that's available to the professional license. But to get that, you do need to have the professional license in the first instance. Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Indeed, we do. So I'll address this to Darren, as he was talking about Google Docs. So I have Google Docs app on my iPhone. Does it work the same as on a laptop with JAWS?
Excellent question. This is a real challenge, actually. When you think of how we're in an environment now where we're using or expecting to be able to use all of these apps on different platforms, sometimes they're going to work a little bit differently. Now, I know that you've asked about Google Docs. I'm actually going to just briefly mention Google Meet here at this point, because the thing that has really impressed me when I've looked at Google Meet, and we're still really new to this space because it's not the primary application that we're using for any of this within Thomas Pocklington Trust, but I found that when I'm on an iPhone and I'm looking to join a meeting, I've got an invite to something in Google Meet. If I tap that link, it takes me into Safari, and in Safari it tells me as a voiceover user on that meeting screen that there are keyboard shortcuts available, such as I think it's Command D to toggle. No, it's Command D and Command E, and I can never remember if it's D for microphone or E for video, or if it's the other way around. But it actually says the keyboard shortcut right there in the middle of Safari on an iPhone or an iPad. It's phenomenal. How about Google Docs? It's not quite the same. I think it's a real frustration point, actually, for a lot of iOS and iPad OS users who might be wanting to take advantage of not just Google applications, but any application that is cross-platform, because to some extent you're kind of at the mercy of that app developer to be able to kind of get their act together and implement the same kind of feature set that you would expect to find elsewhere. So I would say that with Google Docs it's doable, but it might not quite look or feel the same through the app. But it's still worth giving it a go. If you're ever in a situation, especially with a Google app, that it's not working in the app on the phone as you might expect, try it through Safari or Chrome. You never know.
Is it worth pointing out, it might seem a bit obvious, but especially with word processor type apps, you do really need an external keyboard.
Yeah, it is.
Bluetooth keyboard or something if you're using it on an iPhone.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if you're really fortunate, a Braille display could be useful here too. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no point having an app with a whole bunch of keyboard shortcuts if you don't have the ability to take advantage of them. But thankfully, Bluetooth keyboards, they really are inexpensive these days. You can pick them up from any standard electronic retailer, offline or online. They'll have some.
So next question, I'll ask Graham this. How often is the VitalTech website updated? And in regards to note-taking, the difficulty is unplanned notes. They also believe that the accessible digital voice recorder is very essential.
A voice recorder can be really useful. I mean, if you're out, say you're at a conference and someone does come up to you and wants to quickly give you a number, then it can be really handy just to have a voice recorder in your pocket. That can work for many. I have a cheap Sony one that cost about £30, but there are also devices like the Victor Stream that people might use for listening to MP3 files and other things that also has a voice recorder on it. There are apps as well that you can use on the phone. I mean, there's a few such as Just Press Record. I also use one called Recorder HQ, and often if you're used to using your phone, you can get to those apps quickly-ish. But sometimes the standalone voice recorder is still the best option in my view.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just coming back to the point about the VitalTech website, so we're always looking at researching content for VitalTech. It's always it's an ongoing thing. We're well aware. In fact, the very reason that VitalTech itself is a website is so that we can publish changes as soon as we're aware of something having changed. Now, at the moment, we're actually developing and working on researching a lot of new content, particularly kind of looking around education and employment, because these are obviously absolutely key and for enabling further opportunities for blind and partially sighted people. So at the moment, while we do mention things like screen readers, it might not be quite so straightforward to get the information that you need, maybe in the context that you need it. So we are working on putting together some specific content around employment and education. It's still in the works, but watch this space.
A couple of questions on JAWS. So one question is, what does the JAWS virtual cursor mean?
Robert, do you want to take that?
The JAWS virtual cursor essentially, for example, if you're on a web page, having the JAWS virtual cursor on will treat the page almost like you're reading a document. So you can use your heading navigation and being able to navigate by different elements on the page. So you can jump by heading and links, and you can use your arrow key to move through the document. With the virtual cursor off, it behaves more like you're in an application window where you use the tab and shift tab to go through to move between sort of buttons like you would in an application. So a lot of modern websites that act more like applications rather than typical websites, such as Google Docs, work better if the virtual cursor is turned off.
Yeah, no, that's it exactly, and it's actually I'm sure heard JAWS say when I went into the keyboard shortcuts list in Teams, virtual cursor on. Actually, Teams is a prime example of one of these web apps which might not appear as though it's a web app, but obviously when you're looking at say a table or something that's being displayed on the Teams screen, you're going to want to look at it as though it's a web page, because that's what it is at that point. But when you get out of that view, it's not a web page anymore, it's a fully fledged app. And that's when being outside of the virtual cursor can be really helpful. Now, I guess in Teams, because of the way that it's been set up and what have you, especially in the current version of JAWS, JAWS manages that transition wherever it's needed into and out of the virtual cursor. But especially in the Google Docs scenario or anything else that you're actually looking at through a web browser, sometimes if it's not speaking right, try toggling it on and off, and that's what the keyboard command is there for. So insert Z on a desktop layout, or caps lock Z if your JAWS is set to the laptop keyboard layout.
Great. But one more question about JAWS, and then some interesting questions which will cause some debate. I'll go for the JAWS one first. So, where can I get update training on new features of JAWS? Or how in terms of them working with Office, Teams, Chrome, and is this something that Access to Work will pay for?
Right. Well, I'll start with this. There's actually a really good archive of webinar recordings that are available on the Freedom Scientific training page. So there is a website full of resources all about features available in JAWS, and they always update these and take account of new features as well. So I'd say, first of all, have a look at the Freedom Scientific training page. Don't worry, I'll make sure that there's a link to that included in the resources links that we send around afterwards. There's also the they've actually got a couple of podcasts available on the Freedom Scientific site as well. So there's one that's very recently launched that is actually devoted to training content. So a lot of the stuff that they've got available is just available there on that page. But there's also on the podcast, they've taken the training content and made it available that way. There's also the kind of more generic Freedom Scientific podcast that they've had usually out every month or so for quite a while now, well over a decade, that they call FS Cast. And I mention that because the most recent episode actually has a demonstration of a feature that only was added to JAWS last month, actually, which helps with speech compatibility on with certain sound cards. So there's a demo of this feature in action right there on the podcast. So well worth checking those out. There's also the What's New section of the JAWS Help, the JAWS training page, as I mentioned. So many of these free resources available that you can check out at your leisure. But yeah, as far as if you're looking for professional training, Graham, any thoughts on this?
Yeah. First of all, Access to Work will generally pay for training. I think, obviously in many situations the training that you will need is work specific. So work specific training, yes. I mean, typically someone might come in for half a day or half days or days. The amount of training you need might be agreed at an Access to Work at the point of your Access to Work assessment. In terms of professional training, there are also quite a few other people who offer professional training, though obviously that's training that you would pay for if you were doing it as a user from home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not at work is what I mean more.
Yeah.
Paying for it yourself.
So we're getting toward the end of our time here together. I think I'm just looking through the questions here, and we'll take one last question here. Let's go for why do we choose a Windows laptop as opposed to a Mac when we're using iPhones? Excellent question. I've got some thoughts on this. Robert, really quickly, any ideas?
I think that a lot of it is based on sort of kind of the environment that you're working in. In a lot of workplaces, you don't necessarily get the luxury of really being able to choose. But generally, if you're working in sort of music production and that kind of environment, then you probably more suited to a Mac for using sort of software like Logic with VoiceOver. Generally, if you're sort of leaning more towards sort of kind of the office productivity side, yes, there are options, but generally I think Windows still has the better sort of level of accessibility in that regard.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think in a office context, taking into account all of the productivity software that we've kind of looked at in some respects today, I think Windows is still where it's at. And that's not to say that Mac isn't going to be where it's at. This is why it's so important to kind of keep looking at this sort of stuff, because you never know, it may well be that at some point in the future that VoiceOver in Pages or in Word on a Mac could potentially provide exactly the same kind of experience that we've got here with JAWS in Word. And of course the other point is, if something isn't quite working as you expect on a Windows machine, there's actually a selection of different screen readers that we can turn to. We've kind of focused primarily on JAWS today, but there's NVDA and there's Narrator. So if there's a situation where something isn't maybe quite behaving as you expect, there's a backup. Whereas that isn't quite the case on Mac, sadly, at the moment. Okay, I think we should probably draw this to a close now. We've gone over time, but once again, if I could just really briefly draw your attention to our contact details. So we are, of course, Thomas Pocklington Trust, and you can find out more information about everything that we do on our website, which is at www.pocklington-trust.org.uk. And you can also reach out to us. You can email us at this email address, info@pocklington-trust.org.uk. And there's also the VitalTech website, which we've already mentioned, and that is all about providing impartial access to assistive and inclusive technology. Bless you.
I forgot to mute. Sorry about that.
And you can get to the VitalTech website at www.vitaltech, so that's all one word, vitaltech.org.uk. So all that remains for me to do now is to thank each and every one of you for being a part of our session today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry we couldn't quite get round to all questions, but watch this space. We would love to hear your feedback on this session, so watch out for an email going around shortly with information on these further resources that I mentioned, including the link to basically everything that we've mentioned will be in there. And we'll also have a survey. We'll keep it really short, but if you could provide any comments and kind of let us know your thoughts on this session, that would be really helpful. It will help us plan future webinars as well. So without any further ado, thank you to all of you for joining, and thank you to the panel, to Robert, Graham, and Amadeep. Thank you very much for all your help with making this session happen, and to everybody else within Thomas Pocklington Trust, our fabulous comms team, to mention but one of all of the many supportive people who have made this session possible today. Thank you one and all, and enjoy the rest of your Friday.